My name is Mike Tremont. I'm running a little bit different campaign than what we've had in this party in the past. And I think it's important for me to say up front, actually, all the things that are going to be said today, the following does not need to be said. I am not the good looks and charm candidate in this race, okay? As though that needed to be said. Indeed, if there's anything that I say today that makes you feel warm and fuzzy and good about the direction your government is going, we are miscommunicating. We're miscommunicating in a really important way. I spend a lot of time talking about criminal justice reform. And it's not just because a year and a half ago I retired from my second career as a police officer after 11 and a half years on the road. It's because we have the world's most oppressive criminal justice system in this country. When you consider what it does in conjunction with an insanely counterproductive war on drugs, I really believe that that is the case. We have a big cultural problem. I think we're going the right direction slowly, but there's some specific things that we can do to accelerate that. My primary idea is to replace qualified immunity with liability insurance, but there's a raft of other things that we need to talk about. We're also going the wrong direction in terms of a lot of economic policy. I spend a lot of time talking about monetary policy, and that's not just because I've got a lot of experience with the Federal Reserve System, which I have. I've met with the Federal Reserve Board and the board itself. My research on the banking industry has been cited by the Federal Reserve Chairman himself. I've worked with a lot of Federal Reserve economists, terrific people, but they cannot live up to the mandate that has been handed the Federal Reserve System. And while some of the other folks in this room may make fun of me for saying it repeatedly, we do need to end the Federal Reserve System. There is just no compromise that we should tolerate in this regard. The American public is ready for deep institutional changes, and we need to be the party that puts it out there and that backs it up. I also spend a lot of time talking about the economic policies that go wrong in the United States because of overspending. And it's not just because I was a White House economist working on the budget for a couple of years, something like 5,000 years ago, if I have my timeline correct. But because we're going in the wrong direction, both in terms of efficiency and how well our economy runs, but also in terms of ethics. We're now putting $31 trillion. I haven't checked in the last hour. I hope that number is not off terribly. Some of you, I know, pay a little more attention to detail than I probably should. I think it's $31 trillion. We're putting that on the back of our future generations in the United States. To the extent to which that, we can plausibly claim to care about fellow Americans, we need to do something about that, and pronto. So I do spend a lot of time talking about decentralization and limiting the power of the government, but it's because we have real deep problems in the United States, and I believe the American public is ready to hear that in a way that they have not been willing to hear in the past. So if we run the right kind of campaign, I think we'll get a lot of traction, but it has to be a campaign that brands us without compromise. It has to be a campaign that talks about our principles. We need to lead with our principles. I believe it's our best weapon. As well as I do, the Republicans and Democrats have plenty of weird weapons at their disposal, and they use them. We need to talk honestly and openly, and we need to be forthright, and we need to stick by our principles, and that's why I'm in the race. Thanks a lot. Look, everything you just heard is true, but it's not enough, and it's not enough by half. There are very specific things that your government has done in your name to empower itself to lead us to this position. In 1996, the government changed the Communications Decency Act to encourage platforms to conduct censorship on behalf of the government. The legislation was, in my view, inadvertently written by the stooges who put the legislation in place, and allowed these big tech companies to do things that they would not otherwise have been able to do, to censor and yet not be held accountable in court. That's not a special case that we allow anybody else in our society. We shouldn't be allowing it to them. So we do need reform to Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. We need that fast. And the reason we need it is not because the situation we're in today stinks, although it does stink, because this is the vehicle through which the government agencies are able to drive in order to control these big tech platforms, but because technology is going to become even more important in our future. It's going to get worse before it gets better if we don't stop the federal government from intervening and taking advantages of these situations. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. Once in the White House, a Libertarian president would be able to, through executive order, stop agencies from working with high-tech platforms. Yes, technology companies do have a right to censor if they're working on their own and they wake up one morning and think that's a good idea, and they're able to withstand the court orders and court actions that come after that because people hold them accountable. That's all fine. We need to be able to hold them accountable, and we need to stop the federal government from manipulating them. In a regulatory environment like the one that we're in, technology companies cannot withstand effectively orders coming from the federal government. That's got to stop.
Thank you very much.
We do need to end the Fed. We need to make the case that we need deep institutional change. And to do that, I believe that our communication has to be not just of a technical nature, but of an ethical nature. We need to be able to make the case to our fellow Americans, our brothers and sisters, that they are being ripped off, their families, their children are being ripped off. The people in our economy least able to afford it are the ones that are hurt most, not just by inflation, but by all types of government spending. We need to make the case that when your president talks about canceling school debt, that it's because someone else is going to pay for it. Just because your debt gets canceled doesn't mean that someone else isn't picking up the bill. This is an ethical problem. It's not just a technical economic problem. We need to be able to make that case. By the way, if we don't make that case, nobody else will. Do you think a Republican is going to effectively be able to make the case on an ethical basis and on a technical economic efficiency basis for getting our house in order? The last 2 decades, have any Republicans stood up to this case? No. Are you waiting for a Democrat to make this case? No. Thanks for the chuckle. I appreciate that. No, that's not going to happen. We, as libertarians, are the philosophical descendants of the people that founded this nation based on ethics, based on principles, not based on technical efficiency matters. And that's the way that we need to speak to our fellow Americans to push along the reforms that we know that we need to make for efficiency reasons, for technical reasons, but got to make the case based on ethics. Thanks a lot. Thanks. Yeah, we've been through a lot of subversive wars. I'm not sure we can any longer categorize Ukraine as a proxy war or a subversive war. The President of the United States was there recently. We have nearly 1,000, wait for the word, troops in Ukraine today. At some point, you have to stop calling it a proxy war and acknowledging that the United States is at war again. And that makes it virtually continuously since the Fed. Yeah, see, I'm going back. Well, no, yeah, okay, well, at the very least since the late 80s, right? Look, it is true that we have a problem with the incentive system that is set up for our federal government. Politicians are taking resources, and too often our very lives, in order to conglomerate power to themselves and to use it in a way that advances their particular incentives and advantages at our expense. We need to stand up for the idea that a military intervention has to require a declaration of war. I would go one step further. I would say a declaration of war should be subject to approval by the states. We must make this as difficult as absolutely possible. And by the way, sending $112.5 billion to Ukraine is a military intervention. Let's not be silly about this. Much of what we're sending to Ukraine is manufactured specifically for them. This is not stuff that was laying around on the back porch of Funk and Wagnalls in some residential city in Poland. This is stuff that we're manufacturing today in order to send over there, the same way we would if we were at war to defend our borders, which we're not. We need to get out of situations like NATO, where we incentivize other countries to spend less. We ask them to do less than they otherwise would because we're afraid of being dragged in ourselves. it gets really weird with the incentive systems that we put in place. So we need to cut back how much we're spending dramatically and make it much more difficult for us to get into situations in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. Next up,